All right then. So why don't we get started? So first of all, I want to thank you all for joining today's webinar about suburban development and reimagining how development can be for towns like Oak Park as we grapple with many issues these days, from the pressures of our current pandemic to climate crises to reckoning with race relations in our communities. I am Stephen Morales. I'm a Senior Vice President with the Marwood Group, a policy think tank, and I'm currently running for Oak Park Village Trustee. I'm pleased to be joined by a couple of great Oak Parkers. Before I do that, though, I do want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. I want to make sure everyone understands this program is going to be recorded and that the attendee microphones are currently muted. We are going to have opening remarks by both of our esteemed panelists today. We'll have some discussion among the panelists with some questions that I prepared. But then we also want to hear from you. So we have a Q&A at the bottom. Please make sure, click on it, type in your questions. We've got a great team who's going to be moderating some of the questions as they're coming in and making sure that we get to them. And I promise, as the moderator for the session, I will make sure we have some time to get your questions answered at the end. Great. So with that, let me today introduce you to two great Oak Parkers. I'm joined today by Antony Wood and architect Tom Bassett-Dilley to discuss, is suburban high-rise development good enough? It's an issue that we're facing in Oak Park, and we've had many different developments that have come up in our community that have definitely gotten some responses from the community. And this is something where we're going to be thinking about not necessarily what's happened in the past, although we will visit that, but what should we be thinking forward to the future, right? And to what extent can we, as Oak Park or any other suburb, start to demand more from the architecture that's coming into our communities? So with that, why don't I turn it over to Antony and Tom? Will you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you've been involved with architecture, and specifically, how has your design interest in suburban design intersected with the village of Oak Park? And maybe Antony, you can go first.
Okay, yeah, hi, Antony Wood. Well, I'm an architect by profession. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from round here originally. I come from England. I've lived in Oak Park for 15 years. So I'm an architect. I'm a professor of architecture at IIT, and I lead a Chicago-based organization called the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, which is the worldwide trade association for all those involved in high-rise buildings, but increasingly in the future of urban density and future cities. I live 3 blocks north of Vantage and Albion. I'm in the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District. And on both occasions when Vantage and Albion were proposed, I was kind of thrust a little bit into the dialogue around those projects, partly because, living 2 or 3 blocks north and being an architect and this role with the Council on Tall Buildings. So although some of my views, which will probably come out today, are not necessarily, gung-ho pro tall buildings, but that's my background into why I'm involved in this seminar today.
All right, and I'm Tom Bassett-Dilley, architect. I've had my office here on Harrison Street in Oak Park since 2006. And it's funny, as a kid growing up in Indiana, what got me into architecture was, I was enjoying my drafting classes and that kind of thing. And then I went to the library to look at architecture and found a book on Frank Lloyd Wright. And it just turned me on to no end that buildings could be so beautiful and so well harmonized with the environment. And it was 1979, and I was really interested in learning more. So I went down to the bookstore, and the books on the shelves were about passive solar because it was 1979. It was the energy crisis. So the idea of the beauty of design and energy efficiency were kind of intertwined for me from the very beginning. And also, I will say, a real sense of idealism that in architecture and in design, we're thinking about how to make things beautiful, how to build a beautiful world, a beautiful building, a beautiful world building by building, let's say. But what's really interesting in what we're talking about today is that it's not just the buildings, it's the entire urban habitat and that's a more complex question. But anyway, fast forward to many years after getting my graduate degree in New York and then moving out to LA for 9 years, landed back in LA, in Chicago, and then wound up living in Oak Park, home of Frank Lloyd Wright. So anyway, I'm happy to be here, talk about this. I'm not an urban design specialist, but I'm very obviously concerned with Oak Park and the village, and have my my views, and having been through a fair amount of history in the last 19 years.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks very much, Antony. You know, I think our audience is very interested, Antony, in your perspective, since the Council for Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats has a real global view about other suburban developments in general, right, that you've seen around the world, and what the goal of development could be in your opinion. So, and I think you've got some slides prepared. Maybe you want to kind of take us through some of your thoughts.
Sure. So you know, over the past few years, I've had lots of discussions with neighbours and others in Oak Park. I know I know some of the neighbours, some of my neighbours are tuning in tonight, but you know, I keep talking about these projects that I see as being exemplars around the world. Not necessarily just for Oak Park, but projects that, in my view, do something special. And so tonight is my opportunity to show some of those. I should start by saying that I think the debate about high-rise buildings in Oak Park became pretty polarized pretty quickly. And there were people for tall buildings and people against tall buildings. Personally, I don't think the increase in density and even in the increase in height is the issue here. I believe there is a need for an increase in density in all places, actually. You know, there's 1 million people urbanizing on this planet every week that we need to accommodate somewhere for the next 30 years. And although they might not all be coming to Oak Park, I think every place needs to look to increase its density where there's infrastructure provision for it. So I don't think, for me personally, it's a reaction to high-rise buildings and increased density. But what I feel very strongly about, and you know, and I'm not going to mince my words with this tonight, and it might come across as a bit of a shock, but I think the high-rise developments that have happened in Oak Park are, if I'm being very polite, lacking in complete ambition on any level. You know, they are 100%, in my view, commercially driven, and they play to no other agenda than a maximum financial return on a plot of land for the developer. And I think, you know, that's a controversial statement. And if some of the developers are online, they'll probably disagree. But I want to show you some projects around the world that, and by the way, all these projects also make a profit for a developer, or they wouldn't be built. Yeah. But I want to just show you some of the agendas that these projects are working to, and what they create, you know, aesthetically and functionally within their place. So, right, so I just need to, okay, right. So the first set of projects that embrace sustainability in a positive way. We all hear this word sustainability. What does it mean? It means a lot of different things. In this case, it means green walls. You know, Albion was meant to have a green wall at the back of it. You know, this is a green wall. And by the way, that's a vertical image on the right-hand side there. You know, it might look like a field, but it's not. You know, the science behind bringing vegetation into cities and into buildings is absolutely proven. I'm not going to talk about it now, but then look at the aesthetic that is also created. It's a project in Milan, Bosco Verticale, the vertical forest, a residential plant. This is a real image, real project of projects in Milan that are literally, you know, adorned with greenery. Project in Nicosia in Cyprus, again, a residential building, which I just feel is a beautiful object, but has this other agenda of providing this vegetation to, you know, trap pollutants and sequester carbon and, you know, all these other benefits. But we could take that a stage further. This is a project in Japan that's not just greenery, this is agriculture. This is fruits and vegetables, which are then consumed inside the building by the office workers in the canteen. So it's not just about vegetation. We can put that vegetation to work and actually start to grow vegetables through vertical farming in the facade and other parts of the building. You know, sustainability, is it about capture of solar energy? It's a project in France, which you know, has these dynamic movements on the outside that actually capture energy through these solar arrays. Similarly here in a more fixed way, but in Korea, where the facade becomes an energy generator. Is it about it? This is another project, by the way, in Sydney, which you know, it was relevant in the context of Albion because there was a lot of talk about how Albion was going to shadow Tom's project in Austin Gardens, but large parts of Austin Gardens. And this project, that urban chandelier that you see hanging down there, actually on the top of the low-rise roof, that's filled with mirrors, and the mirrors bounce off the top of that roof to the underside of the urban chandelier and bounce into the nearby park. So that actually that building is not shadowing the nearby park, and again adorned with greenery. Is it about harnessing wind energy in Tolbern? It's a project in London, project in Melbourne that looks to harness wind energy and also built out of timber, which again, this is a massive movement in the world right now to start building tall buildings out of timber because of the benefits of doing that. I mean, part of my message is that we're doing all these wonderful things around the world, but none of this is coming to Oak Park. Projects that go beyond just this standard rectilinear, air-conditioned extruded box, you know, and actually create beautiful objects. Now, okay, this is tall. I'm not proposing this in Oak Park, but this is in the suburbs of Toronto, in Mississauga. Project in New York. It's not just a glass box. They call this the court scraper. These residential apartments focused around this common courtyard. Beirut, of all places, look at this beautiful residential object created in Beirut. Not far from that, still in Beirut, another beautiful object. Montpellier in France, all residential buildings that do something really quite stunning. You know, why do we build buildings out of all glass? You know, most of the projects that have been proposed in Oak Park are predominantly all glass, you know, but look, if we move away from glass, there's a chance for greater expression, quite beautiful. Even dare we introduce color. There's a project in Africa. You know, this is in Accra. Look at that. I mean, that is just stunning in my view. Even if we do glass, there's still a way to introduce color into glass. You know, communal space. I mean, this is a key one for me. You know, communal space in high-rise buildings. You know, every project in the City of London now that gets built in this 1 square mile City of London has to have public space at the roof that anybody can go to. And this doesn't even charge a fee. They've got it. It's public space. You know. Sky gardens at height, communal or public space. My PhD was on sky bridge connections between buildings. You know, these are not particularly tall, these towers, by the way. And it's not just circulation. Here's a scheme in New York where that 2-story sky bridge, the lower level is the image you see there. It's a swimming pool, and the upper level is a lounge. So again, you can create communal space, and Singapore is really interesting. You know, this, by the way, this is social housing, these 8 towers, and 80% of people, and I think we're going to talk about this today, affordable housing, 80% of people in the entirety of Singapore live in government built social housing. But look at these social towers that are connected with 3 levels of sky bridges, creating significant urban habitat in the sky. Another project in Singapore, you know, I mean, incredibly dense, but somehow we have managed here to put 4,000 people living on a plot of land and recreate the ground area 3 times in the sky through the use of the roofs, you know. So density doesn't have to come at the expense of amenity or even of public space. That gets me onto one of my real hobby horses about how we don't use the roofs of tall buildings. We normally fill them up with crap like this, you know, like water tanks and satellite dishes. But, you know, the roof is arguably the most valuable space. And if we brought the idea of the roof and the sky bridge together, then you get projects like this. Again, this is a real project. This is the 50th floor of the Marina Bay Sands project in Singapore, urban habitat in the sky. So just as a counterpoint now, and I know this is controversial, let's look at all those wonderful things going on around the world. And then let's look at what we're doing in Oak Park. You know, and I've put these in historical order, but I don't know it gets any better. Oak Park Place Apartments, as it's called now, Vantage, Emerson, Albion, you know, more recently 1133. That, you know, and this is where I'm coming from with this. There's no aspiration. I'm not even sure it's architecture. It's just clad commercial space that is the only agenda is driving maximum financial return. And again, if I haven't made my viewpoint clear enough, I just want to tell you that the project we're looking at here, and I apologize if you were involved in this project or if you live in it, but for me, it's possibly the worst piece of architecture I've seen anywhere in the world in the last 10 years. You know, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I have to pass it every day because I live near here, but it's really just not great development. And we've got developments coming up, you know, controversial developments on Lake Street and, you know, on the Dreschler site. And I'm kickstarting the conversation by saying, maybe in most suburbs of Chicago or other cities, maybe this is fine, but this is Oak Park, and Oak Park prides itself on this connection to architecture. People travel thousands of miles to come and see the architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright and others in Oak Park. Why have we given up on that? Why is that just a historical legacy? And in terms of current and future developments, it just goes to the highest bidder and it's just commercially driven. And the final slide, Stephen, before someone jumps in and says, well, Antony, that's all well and good, but the projects you show are just, you know, they're in such financially secure places that they can afford to do that. And we can't do it because we're so poor in Oak Park that we should be thankful that anyone would even want to develop here. Well, look at the places I've shown you: Accra, Beirut, Bogota. These are not first world cities necessarily, and yet they managed to do so much better there than I think we're doing here.
Great. That's a great stepping off point, and we're already seeing a bunch of questions come through. But before we get to the questions, Tom, I did want to give you a chance, you know, as an architect who's designed things here in Oak Park, you know, what's your take on what Antony just showed?
Oh, well, first of all, it's some really, really fabulous projects and inspiration. And it just goes to show that if you have vision and desire and drive, great things can happen. And that's what's happened historically. You know, that's what happened when Chicago invented the skyscraper, you know? So I guess I want to add that, you know, the focus of my firm is sustainability. And so I really appreciate some of the images you're showing, Antony, in terms of the timber construction, integrating renewable energy as an integral part of the design. And there's so much that can be done positively in the design of buildings to be far more energy efficient than the code requires at marginal upfront cost. Usually that marginal upfront cost is not something the developer is interested in paying for, because they're going to sell the building. They're not going to reap the benefits of a healthier indoor climate or lower energy bills or less pollution, better indoor air quality. None of that is going to help their bottom line. And that's a problem. That's a problem with the model of, you know, profit being the priority. So I think what this all points to is that without vision, we don't get greatness. You know, you have to reach for it. And so what I'm really interested in this whole dialogue is, you know, what are we interested in as a village? What do we want our village to look like down the road? And if that's really a community vision, then that needs to be something that is born out of the community and is revitalized as you know, our community grows and changes. But how does it address issues of equity? How does our vision address sustainability? How does it address the character of Oak Park and our idea about what a beautiful environment is in the different parts of our village? So those are kind of the broad picture that I bring to it.
So Tom, let me keep you on the hot seat for a second, though, because it's great to talk about let's have a vision. You've actually designed projects here in Oak Park and other places. Have you seen in other localities where they say, here's what our vision is, you know, can you work within this, and kind of force you to kind of up your game in some respects?
Well, you know, I'm not as qualified as a lot of other architects to talk about that, because since I'm so focused in sustainability, I work for private owners or, you know, institutional owners like the Park District that really are interested in me helping them with ecological, let's say, agenda. And that typically is not the agenda of developers. So again, unless they're developing to hold, like, you know, like if you're a residential developer that develops apartments to maintain, or affordable housing, a lot of times can be along these lines. So I don't really have a really great sense of like which municipalities are really requiring more, but I can tell you that some neighborhoods, for instance, in Seattle, have eco districts, and so that will help really guide priorities in development. There are communities that require very specific commitments to affordable housing in all housing developments. And so I know it's out there, and I know that we can, as a village, develop our metrics for success that are reflective of a master plan. And that was the disappointment for me in seeing, what happened with Vantage and Albion. It's not that tall buildings are necessarily bad by any stretch, but the plans that we had in terms of Envision and the downtown master plan, our latest go at this, did not envision that scale of project. So those broad plans are really born out of a lot of stakeholders representing all the different ideas and values in the village, from historic preservation to economic, downtown Oak Park, housing, et cetera. And so the idea is to try to create a plan that sort of balances these different stakeholder interests. But I think what we've seen is really the kind of the economic interests prevail without the community buy-in. And that's the problem. I think we really need to get back to creating that community vision, revitalizing it, and having something to go on that really will take us in the right direction.
It's very, very well said. Some of the questions that are coming through kind of align with some of the things, Antony, that we were kind of discussing. Do you feel like in a lot of the examples that you gave, that those are places where government policies have essentially directed or tamed the decisions of developers and kind of give for the potential of maybe turning some developers away, right? But they kind of direct them to sustainability, right? Or in that case in Singapore, like a stronger sense of community.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and by the way, if I've misrepresented this, let me put this right. I'm not criticizing architects. This is not a lack of creativity on the behalf of Oak Park or American architects. This is 100% driven by government policy. And I'm not even criticizing owner developers. They want to make a profit. That's their primary reason. But a lot of them also want to create great architecture. But if there's no vision, if there's nothing from a government level mandating, that you need to do this, you need to do that, then there's no carrot, there's no stick, there's nothing. And so the developer is going to do pretty much just what they want to. And you only need to look around the world. I mean, we were talking earlier, London. You want to develop a residential apartment, then okay, 20% affordable housing. Yeah, you'll still make millions and millions of dollars, Mr. Developer, but maybe $10 million less because you've got to do this affordable housing, but it's 20%. And by the way, if you go to 35%, then we'll expedite the permit and cut that whole process down by maybe 3 to 4 months. So carrot and stick. But yeah, it's all down, whether it's about, mandating about, how much carbon in the materials that you build with, or mandating whether the building should generate energy, mandating that it should be public space. I mean, I would instantly say that the roof of every tall building in Oak Park should be public space. That sounds radical, but it's not. It should be public space. By the way, the site was probably public space before you built the development there. So put that space back on the roof and let people get up to the roof and look down on Austin Gardens. Let it not just be a communal space for the people who live in the building, but let it be public space. I don't think that's so radical, and that is happening all around the world, but it will not happen without some vision and government insistence on it. And I think final point, sorry for talking so much, but I think the general ethos here is we should be bloody lucky that any developer wants to come and spend money here. Oh, thank you. We'll give you money to develop and make money. I'm telling you now, if this can't happen in Oak Park, it won't happen anywhere in the whole of the US, because Oak Park has so much going for it. Not just the architectural legacy. There's a lot of, people want to move into Oak Park, because of a whole bunch of reasons, not least schools and all the rest of it. So Oak Park has got so much going for it. If it really doesn't stack up financially in Oak Park, it doesn't stack up anywhere, in my view. And as I've shown with these other projects, it does. But it needs vision and it needs government control. And if some developers say, well, that's not for us, then fine. There are others who it is for them.
I mean, that's so well said. And I think it really kind of speaks to aspirationally what we should be looking to, right? As a community, trying to even change the perspective we have on some of the Frank Lloyd Wright. Imagine if we could see Frank Lloyd Wright from a viewpoint that he never even imagined, right? And it could be a truly inspiring and amazing thing. People have sometimes talked about Columbus, Indiana, right? For those that don't know, it's a relatively small town. I believe Cummins Engine Company has a facility there, but they have attracted so many different architects to come in. I believe they've got a avenue of architects, is what they call it. With works by I.M. Pei and others. I'm just curious, for Tom and Antony, is that maybe a good model to learn from, or should Oak Park kind of take its own path?
Well, it's interesting. So I got my undergrad at Ball State, and we took a field trip down there, and we learned that Cummins Diesel, I think, had the idea that they would sponsor the fee for a well-known architect, and that helped bring the I.M. Pei and the Aero Saarinens and Eliel Saarinen too, to Columbus. And I think that's a nice idea. But my interest really is, it starts with a kind of a broader question, which is, if we're going to continue to add density and think about how this village will reshape because of changing economic climate, et cetera, what will that likely, how could that look? How should that look? I'll give some examples. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is that it's not just a great building here or there. Those can be anchors and attractions, but what's really important is the urban fabric, is that we have a sense of community, and that you don't, just have a streetscape that has this one character, and then there's, the streetscape that doesn't have character because nothing is united and there's no sense of what that urban habitat is really all about. I mean, just think of the great neighborhoods you've been in. And what do they look like? And well, maybe if they're taller, the streets are a little wider so that light can get down and trees can grow. Maybe if they're, 4-story neighborhoods, the streets are a little narrow. That feels really nice and personal, So this is urban design at its best. And I think when we look at density, it's not just going up 20, 30 stories. It can be more 4 and 5 stories in the right places. So yes, I think if there were a sponsor, a great architect kind of thing, that could be nice. But I think the first thing we should do is really have good urban design to take a broad view of okay, what about Madison? If we're densifying, should we be building up around Madison and not just Lake Street? How do we do that? How does that connect to transit? I mean, they're complex questions that are really the ecosystem of Oak Park. So I guess to me that was what I would that would be what I would like to see invested in first, is a really visionary urban planning exercise that really takes seriously what the stakeholder values are going to be, like character, preservation, sustainability, being a forward-looking community, equity. I mean, we can't keep segregating our village by building expensive high-rises that don't have affordable housing. I remember, sorry, I'm tangenting here a little bit, but One Earth Film Festival a couple of years ago had a really wonderful film about Reston, Virginia, and how that was a vision of its developer to create an integrated community in I think it was early 1970s. It really, that light went on over my head. Is yeah, absolutely. We have to live together, all of us, of different ages and income brackets and skin colors and whatever. I mean, that's the only way you really have a a healthy community. And so what I'm afraid of is if we start to essentially segregate along economic lines, and so affordable housing goes over there and, expensive housing goes over here, not a good model, not a good way to look to the future, I don't think.
That's a great point. Anthony, anything you want to add before? I do want to move it to a couple of specific areas.
I was just going to add about the affordable housing. I mean, Tom's absolutely right on that, and about the segregation. So when London first brought this 20% rule out, 20% affordable housing, with the automatic response from developers was, well, can we build that 20% somewhere else and keep our rich enclave on its own? And the answer in a lot of cases was no. So so the affordable housing had to be part of the bulk development. And then what happened was they had two separate doors and two separate lobbies. Yeah. So they had the rich entrance and the poor entrance. Yeah. And and then it was like, no, but then the government got on top of that, and it was like, no, that's just not acceptable. And so again, it's about laying out this vision and then ensuring that the vision is there, whether it's big thinking vision about what we want these buildings and urban spaces to become, right through to through to the detail. But I absolutely agree with what Tom's saying. And the other thing with the finances is this, and this is, you see, the whole thing's just become so dumbed down to the lowest common denominator, and importantly, the lowest common risk profile. That's what it's really about. No one is being encouraged or allowed to take any risk with it. Yeah. But the reality is that what these developments show, that I've shown you, say is, if you take that little bit of a risk, there's a bit of a risk involved, but if you set your bar so much higher, then people respond. And the people that can buy those richer apartments that help to subsidize other things, they do. And actually the developer ends up making as much or more money because the price per square foot is higher, because now you've got bloody trees on your balcony, or you're generating your own energy, or you've got this fantastic space at the top, whatever it is, and so that the stuff I'm talking about also comes with a financial benefit, not just a cost impact.
Anthony, that's very well said. And I think that the whole theme here is really about raising the bar. We talked about raising the bar now from an equity perspective. Talked about raising the bar, obviously, and changing the roofs into public spaces. Tom, I want to take it to you before we start to get to some of the audience questions. I know you were part of the Village Climate Action Plan. How can we really raise the bar when it comes to sustainability in our developments? And I think there's some questions that came through, even in some of the selections of materials, like that some concrete may be more polluting than others. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, primarily the basis of the Climate Action Plan is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to avert climate disaster. And so it starts with the greenhouse gas inventory to find out where we're emitting the most, and then, tackle those things first and fastest. But it's interesting you bring up about materials, because it's true that a lot of the energy expenditure of a building is in its first expenditure of the materials. And if you're using a very, high intensity, energy intensity materials, concrete and steel and aluminum, it can really have a great deal of embodied energy. And this is one of the beauties of the timber movement that Anthony's talking about. Taller timber buildings are happening, and wood is renewable resource, and it carbon sequesters when it's growing, and so your energy profile is totally different. So I think that what we're seeing in most targets, like Paris Accord is saying, I believe it's a 40% reduction by 2030 and full carbonization by 2050, decarbonization by 2050. Now, it might have the intermediate number wrong, but that full decarbonization by 2050 means that if you're going to be meeting all of your energy needs through renewable resources, then the buildings that we're building today have to be able to be zero energy buildings. And the buildings that we're building today are going to last, hopefully, at least 50 years. And we're talking about only 29 years before 2050. So this is a real, we have to turn a corner, and we have to do it very quickly if we're going to meet these kind of energy goals. Now, the good news is it's attainable on smaller buildings, certainly. Larger buildings that are very dense and are using a lot of energy, you're not going to be able to get a solar array on top of a high rise that will offset, a fraction of that energy. But there is renewable energy on, from wind and from, community solar, which is coming, and some of it's already, is already there. So I think that those are some of the really important issues that are going to drive the bar that new buildings should meet if they're going to make a climate action plan really real.
Great.
Energy primary. There's also water, there's urban habitat, there's waste, there's food, there's a whole series of, but the fundamental part really is that greenhouse gas inventory.
All right, fantastic. And I know we had talked a little bit about the master plan, or Tom, you had mentioned the master plan. For those that don't know, that is a 2014, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, document called Envision Oak Park that was put together through a lot of community collaboration. Did both of you feel like that needs to get updated, in this next cycle of trustees that come through to the village?
Yeah, I think it should be something that's constantly looked at, isn't it? Shouldn't it? Yeah,
I mean, I just think of where we were in our heads in 2014 compared to now to think about climate change as an example, or how has our conversation around equity and race changed from 2014 until now? I mean, I think that it absolutely should be updated and revisited, and these things should be kept alive. There's no question. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So then maybe the last thing we do before we kind of get into some of the direct questions that we've been getting, and it's quite a lot of them, so please keep them coming in. Maybe just a fun question for both of you. So, what do you each of you think is the last great building that was built in Oak Park?
I'm going to answer this first. Because I'm going to embarrass him probably by saying this, but this is hand on heart. I think Tom, Bassett-Dilley's building in Austin Gardens is the best piece of architecture we've seen in Oak Park in the last 10 years. I see that several times a day walking my dog. I think it's a beautiful object in the park, but also its environmental credentials are fantastic. And I'll tell you the thing I love about it, and I spoke with Tom about this at another point, and he said it was maybe subconscious, but at nighttime, when the lights come on, it's got uplighters and downlighters on the outside of that building. And when you're across the park and you're walking past there, it really feels like evocative of Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, and it's not a Frank Lloyd Wright building. It's not a Prairie building in any way, but there's an evocation of Frank Lloyd Wright in the detailing of that, which I think it's an incredible building. So I know that embarrasses you a little bit for me to say that in this forum, Tom, but seriously, great piece of art.
It's a nice kind of embarrassing. I really appreciate it. I love the building. I love the Park District's vision on sustainability and putting themselves out there and doing it. And I love that they've got kids in there learning about gardens and water reclamation. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I think that a great building that's been built in Oak Park is the library. The main library is because it's an interesting building. It's functionally a really powerful building. It has interesting spaces and has community function. But the thing is, I guess this really embodies how a building enhances its environment. I mean, they're very careful about the facade that faces the park and how that's different from the facade that faces Unity Temple. And it's a strong sculptural building with some beautiful materials and spaces that, I mean, that to me is what's really key, is that we don't think of our buildings just as sort of separate individuals, but as part of this fabric, and yeah, I really admire that. And the same architects did Ridgeland Commons, and that's a striking building now. They really took something and made it better. So yeah, there's some.
No, that's very, very well said. Thank you, and thank you both for that. But we have so many questions, and I just want to get to a few of them. So one of the viewers wanted to know, if you were kind of evaluating a new development, what is the criteria to evaluate it in reference to its immediate setting, right? So we're talking a lot about raising the bar and talk a lot about innovative things, and I think people definitely appreciate that. But I think we also have to recognize that we are in Oak Park, right? So when you think about that, what should be the measure for how well a new building kind of fits in with the Oak Park culture, feel, character?
I think that starts to get into dangerous territory. I mean, people in their thousands travel to Oak Park to see Frank Lloyd Wright. Do you think at the end of the 19th century, Frank Lloyd Wright was thinking, how do I fit in with my neighbors here? There's a beauty about Oak Park, the collective beauty. The collective beauty of Oak Park is you walk the streets and almost every home is different. It's beautiful and great. And I see one of the questions coming in, we've not mentioned about preservation. Absolutely. That needs to be preserved, not only preserved, but protected and loved. And it is. But that doesn't mean that Lake Street and Madison and others right now is populated with the same architecture. It's not. A lot of it's actually pretty dire architecture going back many decades. And there's an opportunity to rebuild and densify those kind of more urban thoroughfares and supported by infrastructure. That's why some of these developments have been successful, because they're so close to Harlem L Station. So I don't think, I think we got to be careful with, how you started there, Stephen, which is but this is Oak Park, so somehow it needs to all fit into a twee kind of Oak Parkish, no, we're not, we're still kind of caught somewhere in the early 20th century. I don't think so. I think we want people to come and travel here to see the modern day equivalent of Frank Lloyd Wright, the real advances in architecture that are happening here. And I think it can be done in such a way. And I've shown you some of the projects that are stunning in their own right and don't necessarily, not fit in, because, they can still do both, I believe.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we definitely don't want to be encouraging, rehashes of Prairie Style or anything like that. I would say, Stephen, that probably the approach that I envision or I imagine is, if we have a good planning exercise, we create a series of metrics by which we evaluate the quality of a project, and then we bake those into the planning process, and we ask developers when they're asking for planned development or variance kind of thing to address them. And and one of them could be, tell us how your building is going to enhance the quality of Oak Park. How is your building really going to be beautiful? How is your building going to address the environment? Maybe you're going to be required to meet a certain energy efficiency threshold. How will your building advance a sense of community and equity? And so these things need to be figured out how you ask that. But if you don't ask, you won't get anything. I mean, one of the great sort of reach codes out there is the Living Building Challenge. And if you design a living building, you're essentially doing a restorative building. It's net positive energy, it's net positive water, it has no toxicity, it's low embodied energy, it creates, so anyway, the list goes on. And when they talk about beauty, which is one of the foundational ideas, you can't legislate that. And I don't think you can write a code to say building needs these features or these materials, but you do need to have people, what they do is say, write a narrative, tell us specifically how and why it's beautiful and how that beauty is born out of nature and relates to the environment and the culture, and so when you get people thinking about that and responding and presenting to you about it, it becomes part of the dialogue about their project. And so so it isn't just sort of swept under the rug or ignored or not asked for. So I think this is part of the process.
And I think that gets to one of the things we were talking about is like, how can we actually improve the process? And so once we have that vision, once we have those bars, like putting those bars out there, for developers, and, we may find, that some developers get turned away, but that's a data point that we utilize, right? And say, okay, well, maybe we have to go and change some of the expectations that we have. But at the very least, I think we have to be true to ourselves and try to ask for more. Sorry, Anthony, you were going to say something?
But no, actually, I was going to follow on from what Tom said, but it follows on even better from what you just said, because I think the opposite will happen. If we lay our colours to the mast and say, and set an agenda for a project on a site, and by the way, I showed all those wonderful projects. I'm not saying that any project should do all of those. All I'm saying is just do one. Just give us one thing. It might be a public space at high level in the building. It might be green wall. It might be energy generation. It might be, but something beyond just the banal. And if we set that agenda, then and made that a part of the brief, then I think what we would see is we would start to attract those developers nationally and possibly even internationally who are interested in, who genuinely want to work with that agenda. Like, for example, mass timber. Mass timber in the high-rise industry is just massive now, because there's a lot of just professionals, but only developers who see it as the future, and they want to experiment. They want to get the opportunity to push this 15, 20, 25 stories. So if we, for example, mandated that, we had a competition brief and we want a 20-story building that is really made from timber and exposes the timber and brings out the biophilic aspect. I mean, look where Tom's sat now, that connection to natural, beautiful timber as a material. Then I can almost guarantee we will get developers from Canada and Oregon and other places who that's their agenda. That's what they're trying to do. At the minute, the agenda is so dumbed down. It's who's going to, come up with the best financial scenario for themselves.
Yeah. It's great. It's a great point. There was a question I do want to get to, because we've spent a good amount of time talking about high rises. I've seen a couple questions in there about, well, why have some of these innovative high rises that you pointed out? I mean, I think Boston was just one of the cities that was on your list. Why have they not happened enough in the U.S.? And then I think separately to that, there's another question of like, well, we are in the end Oak Park, right? And should we really be thinking about 20 stories here, 30 stories there, throughout our small little village here? So maybe can you take those two questions as a start, and maybe Tom or Anthony, whoever thinks.
Yeah, I'm not going to go too far out of my lane. I don't know enough about the demographics and how population is moving. I do know there's a CMAP envision, I think it's 2040, the latest one. And so it's a good question. Should we really be planning for more density? I mean, we're a very dense village and we don't have a hell of a lot of open space. And so, I thought Kathy Ike was a great idea to get us some open space. But let me just throw up a whole question there.
Separate thing.
But yeah, I think the assumption is that people are moving more towards urban centers, and that we've seen a certain amount of influx here, and that there is some benefit on the commercial side, maybe, I don't know, but that goes back to the need for kind of a planning expertise, I think.
Yeah, we need that North Star, I think, is what it is. As we were kind of talking and preparing for this, we did talk a little bit about the parcel that is directly between us and River Forest on Harlem, across from 1133. We lost the gap there. We lost the Pier 1 there, right? So that potential building, could become a high rise at some point, right? Or at least in the next 4 or 5 years, someone may propose to develop a high rise there. So your thoughts on that parcel, and like what should potentially go there?
Well, you heard it here first. Stephen Morales says could be a high rise on the corner of Lake and Holland. You know, I think we got to recognize something, and this might be controversial, but you know, retail's dead and it's never coming back. It's not, you know, it's not coming back. It's not coming back. I'm not saying no retail, but COVID has exacerbated, you know, the trends towards online shopping, and the fact that we're seeing Gap and, you know, Pier 1 and all these streets closing. I think we've got to really rethink what the ground floor of buildings is going to be in the future, because we can't fill them all with restaurants, bars and nail salons. Yeah. So that's the first thing, right? So I think you're right that site on the corner of Lake and Harlem is going to end up being something different. I don't know whether it's going to be tall. I don't know whether it's going to be dense. But, you know, and I'm going to let Tom talk about this because I know he's passionate about that corner, but it's a really essential. Arguably, that's the most important. If it is going to become a site, it's the most important site in Oak Park, and we need to really consider carefully what's going to go there.
That's a great example site, because it embodies a lot of these questions of identity. It is the gateway moment when you enter Oak Park from the west. And, you know, there's this beautiful Marshall Fields building, which deserves to be loved and maintained. And I hope it really gets, you know, good tenants and it can continue to thrive. But whatever goes across the street from it needs to be like a dancing partner, you know, they need to be in love with each other. And so, you know, if you put something tall there, that would be murder. That would be casting a big shadow on that building. And not to mention darkening the street. Now, I think that the move that happened on Emerson was better, where you had streetscape building on Lake and then push the high rise back closer to the train, and that all works fine. But the other thing is that you have the Harlem Avenue streetscape being established as well. And so it really will kind of give people their view on what is Oak Park. You know, you turn that corner and here you go. Now, there is the Forest Preserve Park across, you know, catty corner. I'm forgetting the name. Anyway, so there's open space there, which is nice. There's obviously shopping at, you know, Starbucks, Ulta, Whole Foods, etc. And so this area is potentially very good pedestrian area. And one of the things that I find disturbing about the Albion building is that the ground floor is basically dead. It's not a public amenity space. It seems like it's just kind of for the tenants or something. And, you know, it's not like there's anything thriving down there. So whatever happens at the ground floor of that building, I think needs to be an important community supporting function as well, so that people, you know, if something happens there, that it really creates a sense of community coming in and links to everything that's happening down the block with our restaurants and shops and MedMen, you know?
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. You know, we're running a little bit short on time. We've got a bunch of questions, so I just wanted to be conscious to all the audience members who are on. We'll pull down the questions after this, and if we're able to, you know, get to some specific answers on them, we'll put them up on the blog on my candidate page, which you can see in the next week or so. But, you know, I think there was one thing, we've been talking a ton about, you know, high-rise development, and I think everyone recognizes that, you know, around the Green Line is where a lot of that high-rise development has happened. You know, we did get some questions about potentially building outside of that. And we also have North Avenue, right? We also have the Roosevelt and other parts. Gentlemen, would you just give me your you know, maybe 2 minutes on the potential to take some of what we've talked about and apply it in other parts of Oak Park and not just in the downtown area?
I'll jump in just because you didn't, Anthony, and just say that okay. I think that more we can make this more of the village a walkable village, so much the better. We lost our, I'm on Highland South the Expressway. We lost Fair Share Foods at the end of the block. It's a Dollar Tree now, or dollar store. So we're, you know, not a food desert, but it's not like there's no grocery store walking distance. So I think the more we can do that and recreate that kind of, that's a historic thing that would be great to bring back, where every neighborhood has its grocer, you know. So I think that's really important part of the planning exercise, is look at the village as a whole and all the neighborhoods and how they can all support a more sustainable lifestyle.
You know, my answer would be, and I know it's controversial, yeah, but I believe that we can and should densify Lake Street and Madison and other parts that are, you know, especially close to transport nodes. And you know, I just don't feel that it's a threat to people who live, you know, in two-story houses several blocks away. I just don't see that this densification of certain linear routes in Oak Park somehow detracts from their residential existence, from my residential existence. I think it's actually the opposite. You know, I mean, you know, the one thing I really do like about Vantage is you know, is Cooper Hawks and you know, that kind of thing. So there's the potential for more provision to benefit everybody, but when they stay, you know, just these private enclaves, you know, it's like the Albion, and the Albion's taken quite a bit of knocking today. So I'm going to just say, I think the Albion's better than any other high-rise building in Oak Park. Okay, so I'm just going to say that. And I railed against it, but I do think the end result is better than the others. It's more adventurous. But still, when I walk past there and I get my coffee, I see the little private pet door and the facilities for the pets, and I'm walking past with my pet, you know, and there's facilities in there, but it's just for the people who live there. And okay, that's okay to a certain level, but there could be something else for the community, and that's the main point I'm trying to put across today. If we drive that agenda, I think people would be more, you know, supportive of these buildings, because now they have an engagement with it, they have a connection with it, they have a reason to go there. They have a piece of ownership of it themselves in some way, rather than just this private enclave that we view from afar that we can all maybe aspire to one day, you know, whatever, you know. So anyway, the short answer is I know it's not popular, but I do think we can and should be densifying, you know, other parts of Lake Street and other parts of Madison, especially around those transport nodes.
Yeah, so I think that's great. I mean, so in the last couple of minutes, I do want to just kind of raise a couple of points that, you know, I think just to summarize what we've talked about today. So I think I'm in violent agreement with both of you that I think we can certainly raise the expectation that we have as a village to ask developers to bring us more, right? Whether it's more sustainability, more affordability, better design, right? Better character, things that can potentially attract people back to Oak Park, or for those that are coming here to see Frank Lloyd Wright, say, wow, I didn't realize, you know, this is a community that's also attracting some of the, you know, great architects that design something else, you know, that could be really amazing. I do think that we have to keep this conversation going in a lot of different parts of Oak Park. I mean, I appreciate, you know, the viewpoints that both of you have, but also that there are a lot of other viewpoints out there about how high, how wide, you know, how integrated, and that's going to be really important, I think, as we think through the next few years of our development. The one thing we didn't even talk about is how the pandemic affects all of this, right? And just really kind of changing the way that we think about architecture in general, and perhaps maybe for another time. So with that, I will have to unfortunately, you know, bring this to a close. It's been a fantastic conversation with both of you, Antony and Tom. Thank you for donating your time, your thoughts. You know, obviously the research that you did around this subject. I just also want to thank Tanya from the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitats, you know, for putting together a lot of the logistics here and making sure that the invites got out. And thanks also to the audience for spending the time with us. It's been a really fantastic hour. It flew by, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. So thanks so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.